Whether or not a particular work becomes part of the broader societal canon is not the result of a binary yes or no decision, nor granted by some form of authoritative gatekeeper. Rather, canonization occurs through a gradual process of ongoing societal engagement. The general populace remembers what they see, hear, and discuss, in turn allowing these works to develop a shared sense of cultural significance. Through inclusion in the canon, a text gains authority to define what aspects of the past are remembered, celebrated, or critiqued. As the leader Assman argues, canons retain the past as actively circulated memory, constantly reactivating certain narratives to the wants, needs, and anxieties of the present. Upton Sinclair's canonised 1926 anti-capitalist novel Oil and Paul Thomas Anderson's 2007 filmic appropriation, There Will Be Blood, exemplified this process of cultural memory in motion. Anderson's film does not merely retell Sinclair's narrative, but reconfigures its ideological framework to reflect the crises of society confronting late-stage capitalism and increasing secularism. While preserving the novel's portrayal of the dehumanizing nature of capitalism, particularly for its portrayal of religion as a tool repurposed to serve monetary ambition, it abandons Sinclair's optimistic belief in the possibility of collective transformation through socialism, instead replacing it with a bleak vision of capitalism as inescapable. In doing so, There Will Be Blood not only adapts Oil, but selectively reframes its legacy, foregrounding the elements most resonant within contemporary ideological concerns and reactivating them in contemporary cultural memory. Within Oil, religion is inseparable from economic manipulation, offering a materialist reading of performative evangelism as a tool manipulated by opportunists for economic gain. Eli Watkins, a fervent preacher modelled on real-life evangelist Amy Semple McPherson, is portrayed not as a figure of true spiritual authority, but rather as a self-serving manipulator of the faithful. His church becomes a stage for exaggerated spectacle, in which Eli's sermons are described in animalistic terms that border on the grotesque. The Holy Spirit seizes him and he slides down on the floor and begins to talk in tongues, stripping the performance and Eli of any spiritual legitimacy, suggesting that his performances are not only irrational but predatory. As Stuart Blythe notes, such evangelical performances are often used as tools of control due to their ability to motivate congruence towards greater unity and civic participation, a technique which ultimately, in Oil, culminates in financial exploitation. The Spirit commands them to pledge all the money they've got. Religion, then, becomes another site of capitalist control, reflecting Sinclair's broader argument that morality is subordinate to monetary ambition in a society governed by profit, an idea that in the 1920s gained traction, particularly following a period of post-World War I disillusionment in which institutions, including organised religion, were being scrutinised for their complicity in war efforts and a rise in false evangelist figures, ultimately allowing Oil to gain canonical traction precisely because it articulated the anxieties of its time. Yet, Sinclair's critique is not entirely cynical. While evangelism is often manipulated for economic ends, religion itself is not entirely subsumed by capitalism. Instead, Sinclair acknowledges religion's persistent function as an emotional refuge for the working class, a comfort in a world governed by capital. If it wasn't for the Lord, they had very little pleasure in life. Faith, then, is not presented as inherently virtuous, but, as a result of systemic inequality, provides a form of solace that capitalism cannot fully commodify or erase. Ultimately, Sinclair suggests that religion, although vulnerable to commodification and its ability as a means to achieve personal ambitions, retains a latent capacity for communal purpose within an abhorrent system, a function that, crucially, capitalism cannot wholly extinguish. In There Will Be Blood, Anderson adopts Sinclair's critical portrayal of theatrical evangelism as a vehicle for personal gain, but reconfigures it to reflect a more nihilistic worldview, emblematic of early 21st century cynicism in the wake of post-9/11 distrust and the entrenchment of late-stage capitalism. Set within an increasingly secular America, which Anderson argues is a result of religious institutions being eroded by the pervasive logic of the market. Like Ross and Eli in Oil, Daniel Plainview embodies capitalist logic, deepening societal divisions through religion for profit. For Daniel, that the local people flock to Eli Sunday simply proves their gullibility and naivete. As far as he is concerned, there is no reason to provide them with any support, since they already throw their money away on false religious theatrics, using this as a reason to not pay the community's oil rights, a point that mirrors Ross's and Eli's economic exploitation of the devout within Oil. However, Anderson extends Sinclair's critique. Religion is not just hollowed out by capitalism, it is ultimately obliterated by it, culminating in, by the film's conclusion, the literal murder of the preacher by the capitalist. The closing sequence, in which Daniel bludgeons Eli to death, unfolds in a sterile mansion stripped of decoration, intimacy, and warmth, an environment emblematic of capitalist excess. The staging is similarly unsettling, harshly lit, barren, devoid of musical accompaniment, a detached perspective that treats the murder of Eli as inevitable and banal. This emotional vacancy is mirrored in Daniel's lack of expression. There is no cathartic release, no anger or remorse, only the mechanical completion of a task, the elimination of the final obstacle to capitalism, religion. In this, Anderson frames Eli's murder as the ultimate symbol of capitalism's dominion, not only over the material world, but over all forms of moral and spiritual resistance. As Richard Bodie critiques, Anderson doesn't explore capitalism, he exalts its monstrosity and aestheticizes its horrors. This stands in sharp contrast to Sinclair's depiction of religion, not only as a tool for capitalist exploitation, but also as a source of solace and collective meaning for the working class. While vulnerable to commodification, Sinclair's religion retains a degree of autonomy beyond the totalizing reach of capitalism. In Anderson's world, however, it's precisely this moral function that renders religion intolerable. Anderson's vision, thus, marks a radical departure from Sinclair's, a world in which capitalism no longer adapts religion to serve its needs, but destroys it entirely. In doing so, Anderson does not merely preserve oil within the canon, but reactivates its critique of religion and capitalism to address the ideological anxieties of the early 21st century. Ultimately, if, as Lydia Assman argues, canons shape what is remembered, then There Will Be Blood suggests a shift in what society chooses to recall, not face resilience, but its obliteration. When examining how each creator addresses the theme of capitalism, Oil and There Will Be Blood present vastly different perspectives on whether anything can be done to change it. Sinclair's Oil functions as a didactic novel, advancing two central claims. First, that laissez-faire capitalism is an inherently exploitative system which entrenches inequality and moral decay. And second, that Marxist socialism represents the only viable solution, a redemptive framework for which the destructive consequences of capitalism can be overcome, should society collectively commit to its principles. Sinclair characterizes capitalism as an irresistible will to degeneracy, a dehumanizing system that compels individuals to abandon morality in favor of profit, ultimately rewarding exploitation and systematic inequality. This culminates in the world of oil, a society rife with electoral corruption, exploitative wages, a culture of extravagant excess amongst the uber-wealthy, and ultimately to the murder of several of the novel's protagonists. Yet, the novel maintains a sense of optimism, embodied most clearly in the figure of Paul Watkins. Modelled as a Christ-like martyr, Paul preaches a gospel of worker solidarity, travels to impoverished nations as a political missionary, and ultimately sacrifices himself for the collective good. His death, by agents of capital, is framed in sacrificial terms. He is silenced for denouncing injustice, and martyred for preaching a better word. This rhetoric is even draped in overt religious vocabulary, proclaiming the truth and calling for conversion of the people. Furthermore, like Christ, Paul becomes more powerful in death than in life, transformed into a symbol of revolutionary hope, inspiring others to fight for systemic change. Ultimately, Oil presents capitalism as morally bankrupt, but insists that through socialist awakening, redemption remains possible. There Will Be Blood, by contrast, offers no such solution. Anderson removes Sinclair's political framework, and with it any vision of a possibility for societal redemption, adapting it for a 21st century world entrenched in late-stage capitalism. Where Oil features an underlying optimism, There Will Be Blood is starkly pessimistic, discarding the novel's reformist characters and ambitions. Daniel Plainview, unlike Ross, exemplifies this. He is not a man grappling with the morality of his actions, but rather the embodiment of the man under capitalism at its purest, most violent expression. He experiences no gradual character arc that hints at redemption. Rather, he descends deeper into isolation and meaningless violence, a far cry from Sinclair's Ross. No ideological counterweight exists in Anderson's world. There is no Bunny, no Paul, no collective movement, only a vast, sterile landscape drained of life, meaning, and hope. This bleakness is mirrored in the film's visual landscape, an endless stretch of inhospitable land drained of colour and life, characterised by a desaturated colour grading full of sickly browns and yellows. The environment, as a result, offers no reprieve, vitality, or purpose beyond its use for relentless extraction and monetary profit, visually reinforcing Anderson's nihilistic vision of a world where capitalism is not only unchallenged, but utterly inescapable. Ultimately, Anderson's film stands not simply as a reinterpretation of Sinclair's novel, but as a demonstration of how the canon evolves to reflect contemporary anxieties. An America characterised by far-right capitalism, in which capitalist conglomerates only continue to become increasingly controlling. It is no longer a story of potential revolution, but a bleak prophecy of capitalism's totalising reach, actively reselecting aspects of oil to suit the moral and ideological contours of the present. Ultimately, Anderson's There Will Be Blood exemplifies how appropriation within the canon is not a passive act of preservation, but an active reshaping of ideological memory. The film reveals how appropriations reselect and reframe canonical works to reflect the dominant anxieties of their time, affirming the canon's role as a living, mutable space where cultural meaning is continually reconfigured.